Hello, my name is Ross McGill. I've been a teacher for 25 years and for 17 years working as a school leader in London. These videos are Mark Plan Teach to help teachers and schools reduce their workload and work more effectively. So Mark Plan Teach, these videos are designed to support the ideas from this book. What makes this book unique is not only is it 25 years of my field notes working in the profession, but about 5 years ago, working with 100 teachers in a school, there was nothing in place in terms of a teaching and learning policy or consistency or clarity. So as a starting point, before we published this book, we looked at designing a Mark Plan Teach set of ideas or a common vernacular so that we could have some consistency within the school. What makes the book unique even further is that I blogged and shared ideas online through my social media channels and received critique from teachers around the world. What I think makes this book particularly special is that these ideas could perhaps work in any classroom around the world. Context. What works in a school or in a particular classroom might not work somewhere else. So this is very important to remember, whether you're with year 1 students or year 11 students, 11 years old or 15, it's very important to take this into context. Not every idea is going to work everywhere, and what you do in your school, whether it's in England, Scotland or somewhere in Europe, might not work in another. So please take that into account when we work through the materials. So what I always advocate is whether you're a newly qualified teacher or an experienced teacher who's been in the profession 20 or 30 years, it doesn't matter who you are, we all need to refine our approaches. Now this doesn't mean doing the latest fad or gimmick. What it's about is just tweaking our approaches as we get more immersed in cognitive science and more immersed in research and evidence in the classroom. So think about it as like a car and you have to have an MOT every year. You might pass your driving tests, but you still need to tweak the nuts and bolts on your car wheels so that you can drive it more effectively. That's exactly what it should be like in the classroom. Whether you're a brand new teacher or you've been doing it 30 years, we should always refine our approaches. Inside the videos and the book of Mark Plan Teach, there are 3 sections. Inside each section, there are 10 chapters. At the end of each chapter, from me, there are further sources of evidence and books to read, or there are contributions from psychologist Dr. Tim O'Brien, who explains not why these ideas are the best, but why these ideas work. To support the videos and the Mark Plan Teach book, there's a link on the screen where you can access further materials to support your work in your classroom. About 5 years ago, when I started to think about my own workload and also the colleagues that I was working with, I started to get very interested in teacher workload. And at this point, Nicky Morgan, the former Secretary of State for Education in England, put out a workload challenge report and started to seek the views of teachers across the profession. This question on the screen was my starting point. And what you'll see here is the Department for Education Workforce Census, which is published every June in every academic year. The research goes back 20 years and the patterns are largely the same. What I would just like to highlight here is several features. We all know that teachers leave the profession within the first 5 years. The reasons why they do that we're still trying to work out, but when we look into the data in a bit more detail, we can see that the attrition pinch point is not just in the first 5 years, but it's actually in the first 2. Teachers tend to leave the profession in greater numbers in the first, second and third year. And when we look closely at this information, the information suggests 7% year on year before it drops to 2% every year. So for you watching this video, how long have you been in the classroom? If you are like me and you're in your 25th year, there's about a 40% chance that you'll still remain in the profession. So to give you a bit of context, last academic year in 2017-18, we lost more teachers to the profession for the first time ever than those entering the profession. To give you some more context, the British Navy on the whole is about 35,000 troops. In 2025, when the pupil population from primary reaches secondary schools, we are going to need 47,000 teachers entering the profession. I've got the image here of Malcolm Gladwell's brilliant book Outliers. Now in summary, you might not have read it, but Malcolm bastardized the comment 10,000 hours. Whether you're a doctor or a pilot or a teacher, that you reach 10,000 hours where you're a master in your profession. Now think about it for a moment. If we are losing teachers within the first 5 years, most teachers will teach 800 hours per academic year. In my career for 25 years, I've taught about 15 to 18,000 lessons. If a newly qualified teacher enters the profession and they reach the first 5 years and then opt out, they're nowhere near reaching their peak performance of 10,000 hours. One more point I would just like to add. Think about a time in your career where you've been really happy in the classroom, a point where you might have taken risks or thought more intelligently about the methodologies or the strategies that you use in the classroom. Most people will say this is in their 4th to 5th, maybe 8th year. And if you do the maths, 800 hours in the classroom per academic year, generally teachers are reaching 7,000 to 8,000 hours where they feel much more confident, and fingers crossed that's where they start to really commit to the profession long term. When the Department for Education published the Workload Challenge Report, there was fascinating data. On the screen you'll see a response here from 44,000 people. At the very top I've highlighted 2 which report what teachers' greatest workload issues are. At the very top, recording, inputting and analysing data. Think about what that looks like in your classroom or in your school and how often you need to record that information. 56% of people that responded, so that's 44,000 people in total, said that this was their greatest workload burden. The second one down, you'll see that teachers have reported that excessive detail of marking is their next greatest burden. On my travels, I have had this confirmed time and time again, regardless of setting, whether it's a primary school, a large secondary school, or a conference or an independent school. Most teachers are saying that they cannot cope with the marking expectations. On the screen you'll see 53% of respondents from 44,000 said that this was their greatest workload challenge. So something has to be done here. The next question I'd like to ask you on the screen is staff meetings. 26%. So if you're watching this video or if you're in a room with other colleagues, put your hand up if you like a meeting. I've asked this question to 12,000 teachers over the last year, and very rarely do hands go up where teachers will say they really like meetings. So what I ask schools to consider is let's change the way we do meetings. So I'll give you some examples. If you have a stand-up meeting around a table, no one sits down, the chances are that the meeting will go quicker. Second suggestion is have a walkabout meeting around your school's building or outside. Research suggests that this is good for your well-being and your mental health. Get out of your offices. The third idea is from some schools over in Asia where they paint lines on the floor with numbers on it. So a red line with 60 or 15, depending on the time available. And what you would do with the colleagues is you'd follow around the line in normal walking pace, and it gets you not only out your office, but it's a visible presence around the school. And it's another way to enjoy and engage in meeting rather than be stuck in a room somewhere where you don't want to be. So if we want to reduce teacher workload, 26% of people here on this census said they don't like meetings, it's a waste of their time. So let me ask you a question. Why do teachers leave the profession? So this research published by the Department for Education in June 2018, this research goes back 2 or 3 years and it asks why do teachers leave the profession, come back and then leave again. Now most people's responses will be workload, some will be behaviour or salary, but when we actually look at the real reason, 70% of people say workload. Then Ofsted pressure, government goalposts, and very rarely is it pupil behaviour or teacher salary. So it's just something to consider in your own context, where you're working, who's watching this video. Think about the colleagues that you know that have left the profession, come back, maybe left again. What are the reasons for that? The research is clear here, and it's fascinating to see that often it's ideas that maybe are beyond our control, government goalposts, workload expectations, and we'll unpick that throughout the videos and we'll explain why we might believe certain things have to be done. On the slide you'll see a Wordle that's been built up from 12,000 teachers responding to a question that I ask them when I meet them in their schools. The question for you to think about is, what's your number one workload issue? You'll clearly see on the screen that planning, assessment, marking and meetings are the greatest burden that teachers face. But when you ask so many people why they're struggling and these results keep coming back, then it's clear that these are the things that teachers should be given the time to do and what they should focus on the most. Teachers need to simply mark, plan and teach. In my research online through my social media channels, I've been asking people about workload for a long time. Now I know it's Twitter, but having 200,000 followers, the question that I ask, and let me just share the data here, every 3 months about 18 million people see my tweets. I know I have a big responsibility here, not only to expose bad ideas, but also to say what a wonderful profession it is. So let me just share some of the research that I've conducted through my social channels. On the screen you'll see 2 polls that have asked the same question. On the left-hand side you'll see a question where I asked, in your opinion, who is driving teacher workload? Is it Ofsted or the Department for Education, or is it school leaders in your school? And when I conducted this question or research in October 2017, I was really surprised and a bit disappointed to see the results and to see that actually school leaders are the people that are driving teacher workload. So about a year or so later, I asked the same question, but I gave a few more finer results. And the choices here were Department for Education, so politics, changing goalposts, Ofsted coming into school and making everyone perform, school leaders, or could it be teacher habits as well, which is something we'll pick up throughout the videos. Now, school leaders here I talk about in the broadest sense, anyone with a leadership responsibility in your school, not just those people at the very top. And again, what's fascinating about the data is that you'll see 1,000 people plus, so 1,500 people responding to this, said the same results, school leaders. So we have an obligation here as an ex-school leader myself. We need to see how we can protect teachers from external pressures and actually decide what's best for our teachers in our school. So for about 10 years using social media, I've been receiving personal messages from teachers across the land. I'm going to share a couple with you, and they're quite heartbreaking, and I have anonymised them, but here's the first one. I've just been told by my deputy head teacher that a childcare emergency is not an acceptable reason for attending a directed time meeting, despite a family emergency. Both husband and wife are teachers, and those who have children will know that it's very difficult with the school run, or if your child's unwell, that sometimes family has to take priority over work. I would imagine that this teacher's not very happy working in their school. So this is one example. The second example was from a school I recently visited. This teacher shared this information with me before I arrived. You'll see inside the box, so I'd like you to pause the video and just read what it says. In this example, the teacher's wanting a reference to move to a new school. Now, context is key. I don't know the full story. I don't know the head teacher's versions of events. But if the teacher's sending this to me, there's clearly an issue somewhere, whether it's teacher workload, mental health or well-being, or could it be poor leadership? Whatever it is, I receive these messages every week, and I think we need to tackle it head on. So I think with my large social media audience and my passion about improving teacher mental health, reducing workload, you just look at the bottom sentence here, it keeps me awake at night, if I'm honest. I mean, that's heartbreaking. This is a human being, someone who's chosen to work in the profession, someone we might lose to the profession, a good teacher. Now, I know context disclaimers needed here, but if I'm receiving these every week, we need to do something about it. Rather than drive good people out of the profession, we need to work together to keep these people in the classroom. Moving on, I would like you to pause the video, and I want you to discuss or reflect, if you're watching this on your own, what is driving your own workload or the workload agenda in your school. Take a moment to discuss, feedback in the room, and then move on to the next section. So again, on my travels, I've asked the same question to the audience. What is driving teacher workload? Is it school leaders, Department for Education, Ofsted, or teacher habits? And you can see from this small sample of data, which I believe reoccurs in all different contexts around the UK, you can clearly see that it's school leadership. And again, in its broadest sense, this is every leader within the school, those with a responsibility for working with others. So just looking back at one more bit of information from the Department for Education report, so the Workload Challenge report here, you'll see teachers are saying excessive level of detail required and duplication are the greatest factors in increasing teacher workload. So again, think back to your own classroom, your own school, people watching this video. How often are you asked to produce too much detail or repeat the same content a number of times throughout the academic year, or dare I say the same information but for two different sources? So when Nicky Morgan, Secretary of State for Education, around 2014 published the Workload Challenge Report, at the back there was this lovely Annex C document which stipulated some good ideas and some good practice. I'm delighted to see that the 5-minute lesson plan, an idea that I shared about 10 years ago, features at the very top. 2 years later, the Department for Education had a workload party for marking data and lesson planning, and we got this lovely poster. Now, a poster's not going to fix teacher workload, but at least we have lots of endorsements from various organisations and recommendations as to what schools and school leaders should do and what they shouldn't do. My problem here is that on my travels, and ASCL, the Association for School and College Leaders, their research also supports that only 40% of school leaders have seen this document. Now again, I'm not saying a poster is going to fix workload issues, but if school leaders are the problem and school leaders are not actually looking at the latest research, then we clearly have a communication issue across the profession that we need to fix rapidly. Just something to consider for Welsh colleagues, there is a Welsh version of this published by Estyn, and recently there were 34 recommendations of how they could reboot the system in Wales, and I think that's something that we could take as consideration here in England. So a question I've got for everybody. A teaching and learning policy, it's not statutory. You don't legally need to have one published for your school. We know we have to publish curriculum, admissions, exclusions, those kind of things, but a teaching and learning policy is not statutory. It's not required by law. So my question here for you watching the video, why do we have one or why do we need one? Pause the video, have a discussion, or if you're watching this on your own, reflect, and then we'll unpick some of the answers. So some of the responses that I typically hear from my work in schools across the UK are clarity, consistency, communication. If I am new to your school, then I have something to align with. It might also support teacher professional development. More extreme cases, it might be used as a compliance tool, might place teachers into capability, or it might actually go against you when visitors pop into your school. So let me give you an example. This is where the book Mark, Plan, Teach started, the research that I conducted with my colleagues 5 years ago in a school. On the left-hand side, you'll see our learning policy. Now this gradually evolved into a 25-page document, and my fear at the time of writing was that teachers would struggle to access all this information. So what you see on the left is a one-page summary. My problem with it 5 years later, with hindsight, a beautiful thing, is to look at the details of what's written. So all the red words, all the blue words are hyperlinks to lots of information and examples. But when visitors pop into the school, they'll choose one of these bits of information and they'll go and test it around the school and look at the quality of leadership and management and how effective teaching and learning is. In my experience, Ofsted in this case just looked at marking, and they wanted to test what was in policy against what was happening in the classroom. Because it was in writing and because it wasn't consistent across 100 classrooms, it therefore went against us. So I would therefore advocate to protect your own school and to support your teachers is to have a guidance, not a policy, and actually say less within it. A question I would ask myself as a deputy head teacher leading teaching and learning is, was I wanting staff to do this for consistency or compliance? The real answer was that I wanted to support their professional development over a long term, but because it was published as a policy, it went against us. So here's an example in the bottom right of the screen. This is an Ofsted report published in May 2018. Not only did it say that the head teacher works tirelessly, they've got the best results in their history, the behaviour is exemplary, but the bottom sentence says some teachers are not regularly checking in line with the school policy. And at the top, this school requires improvement. So if a school is doing all these wonderful things, but yet still not good enough, what hope do we have as a profession? So in hindsight, 5 years later, I would probably put less in a policy, and I would say it was a big mistake. If teaching and learning policies were a beer, I'd probably say the best teaching and learning policy in the world, number one, don't call it a policy, call it guidance. 2, don't publish it. And then 3, make it harder for visitors to test the effectiveness of your teaching and learning. And later in the video, I'll explain how that can be achieved and pull proxies for learning and those kind of things. But here's an example. This goes into the book and is threaded throughout all the videos. There's 3 sentences here that by the end of the series, these will totally make sense to you. First one, mark, in the broadest sense, assessment. Feedback should be regular, should be diagnostic. Don't put a number on it. Allow teachers to feed back to the students as and when it's needed. They diagnose things to improve so that you as a teacher have a secure overview of your children, including their social, emotional, mental health. In terms of lesson planning, teachers must be clear and precise about why they are teaching material, not what. Let me just give you a question here. The next time someone asks to observe you, they'll probably ask, what are you teaching, rather than why you are teaching this. The why question is a cognitive process which I'll explain in a later video. But think about it for a moment. If I asked you why you're teaching photosynthesis, there's a good chance that you might have to think a bit more deeply about why you're teaching that rather than what you're teaching. That's a good hallmark that I know that you've thought about the lesson over a longer period of time rather than a one-off episode. If I think more about why I'm teaching material rather than what, there's a good chance I will be meeting the needs of all my students rather than ad hoc for external purposes. The last one, teach. The greatest intervention in the classroom is the teacher. And what I advocate here is that the teacher needs to meet all the needs of students, not just individual groups. When instructions are delivered thoughtfully, an explicit use of language, including your subject domain, research suggests that questioning techniques, adapting to meet the needs of children as you give them feedback, there's a high chance that students can then act on your feedback so that they can understand what you're asking them to do. So in conclusion, teachers are always going to be busy. They will always need to mark, plan, teach, but we've overcomplicated our systems, our requirements from external forces, and teachers can no longer cope with what they need to do in the classroom. Some teachers are even taking part-time requests so that they can catch up with the work on their day off, so that they can be with their families at the weekend. We're in a profession where we work with children, but it doesn't seem to be conducive with having our own families. So if we want to save the profession, we need to do less, not more. And I'd like to see that from using these ideas in this book, that by doing less and doing it more effectively, we can improve teacher mental health and well-being and reduce our workload and just get back to some common sense.